Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PTR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. How's everybody doing? Hope we're all doing okay. We're living life, doing well. You know, we got to come in with a winning attitude over here. On this side, we are practicing winning culture. We're thinking about how to think like a winner, so that way you always remain a winner over here at the GSMC. I like that one. That's what we're doing here. So, first things first, we got a lot to talk about. We're going to be talking about my personal fantasy leagues again. Of course, you know, I got to keep you guys up to date on what's going on in my leagues. You know, a lot of things moving and shaking, and maybe a mistake has been made, or mistakes are currently in the making. Who knows? But there's that. We got to talk about some Robert Tonyan, maybe the Ravens. Fantasy-wise, their offense has not really been looking too hot for us. Running back scarcity is getting real. It is getting real for many people out there. What to do about that? The Titans, the Titans situation going on is not helping that whatsoever. Rest in peace to A.J. Brown owners and the people who took Derrick Henry around the 8th round, or I'm sorry, the 8th pick overall. Rest in peace. Some player to targets and trades. And then, of course, we might we get into some games, too, of what's going to happen on Sunday and what to look at. So, first things first, we got to get it in and get it in strong, right? So, Robert Tonyan had an excellent game, and he is one of the, I think he's like number one now, just by an edge. He's like number one tight end in fantasy scoring, and that's exciting. If you picked him up this week, you're looking up. But how much is this going to, how long is this going to last? Maybe it's time to get off Robert Tonyan real quick. So here's why, right? I feel like Robert Tonyan, he should be a good threat, right? In theory. But we've seen how this sort of thing happens, right? Right now, Aaron Jones is on a tear. I almost said all time, but last year we thought it was an all-time tear. He's on pace to break his touchdown numbers from last year, which is insanity, right? He should be on the same level of regression that Lamar is, because if you do the math, that's just kind of how things work. But that's not really happening right now. But this isn't a conversation about Aaron Jones. But Aaron Jones is playing about as well as he could ever play. And, you know, Aaron Rodgers is playing out of his mind. The ball has been moved around a bit. There were some injuries across the board. And Robert Tonyan ate a feast against the Falcons. Granted, it is the Falcons. Their secondary is hurt and bad. Their defense as a whole is not very strong. It seemed to be a recipe for disaster, and a lot of people speculated that picking up Robert Tonyan when Allen Lazard was injured and such would be a tough scene for the Falcons defense, and thus you should have looked to probably look at Tonyan, for example. But here we are, right? So Robert Tonyan had an excellent game, and here's my thought process. Everything will be fine until Davante Adams comes back. Davante Adams is a reception monster. He eats receptions for breakfast. Remember, for week 1, he was literally unguardable, and he caught everything, and he got all the touchdowns. Aaron Jones ate, but everybody else was kind of a little bit scarcely spread around the offense. And with that thought process in mind, when Davante Adams comes back, one, he's going to be very upset. Why? Because he wanted to come back against the Falcons, but they said no. So when he is allowed to come back, he's going to play out of his mind. He's going to be motivated. He's going to have a thought process. He already has. He doesn't have to work his way back into Aaron Rodgers. He knows how to play with Aaron Rodgers. He's been playing with him for years. So it's not like some sort of chemistry issue, that he's going to go back to what he does best. And when you have a team that seemingly has underrated levels of offensive weapons, the whole story of not having enough offensive firepower for Aaron Rodgers is starting to become a little bit shaky this year. But who would have thought that, Alan Lazard and Robert Tonyan would be able to hold their own, and they have no Devontae Adams? Who would have thought? But here we are in similar situations. And for fantasy purposes, Aaron Rodgers does spread the rock around a bit, but there's also the ceiling is going to shrink on Tonyan. You're not going to see Kelsey, George Kittle type numbers from Tonyan, especially if Devontae Adams comes back. So if you have him, and you already had him, you feasted on the labors of Robert Tonyan this past week. If somebody were to send you an offer for him, and especially if it contains, if they have a surplus of running backs, if somehow, some way they've hoarded running backs over the past few weeks, which I find hard to believe because people have been fiending for running backs for all season long, basically after week 2, I would highly suggest if someone sends you a running back that you value, I would fire off. And I would... I'd just stream tight ends for a little bit until you find one that you're comfortable with, because unless you're in a tight end premium league, the drop off isn't that far. I mean, yeah, you won't have a premium tight end, so to speak, but I have a hard time believing that Robert Tonyan is going to end up maintaining this level of pace. So if it was me, I'd probably skip off him for a while and try to trade him high, just like you should try and trade Odell high right now. Because there's just no way Odell is going to continue to excel like this with Baker Mayfield not excelling. It's just Baker Mayfield hasn't had a really good game. And although Odell exploded, that's more due to Odell's level of greatness rather than Baker Mayfield and the Cleveland Browns as a whole, because Cleveland's whole thing is we're going to run the ball. Stefanski is literally just playing Minnesota football in Cleveland at a higher clip at his own choice, and that's what it is right now. It's a lot of running down your throat. We'll throw a play action. Hopefully Baker can hit the target. That's what's happening over there in Cleveland. So when you have something like that going on, if Baker Mayfield isn't on it for the day, then it's kind of up in the air if Odell is going to have success. So if I had Odell, I'd probably try and trade off him too right now and try to get this is going to be his highest peak of value. So you might be looking at a nice return if you can get him off in time. But let's continue on. So let's move on to the trade I made recently. Remember, I traded for DeAndre Hopkins. That happened. And now DeAndre Hopkins is he's not on my team anymore. And a lot of things have moved and shaked since then, right? Basically, let me get an opinion out here. I'm trying to play the long game for fantasy football because in the first quarter, I haven't really needed to stress. The only loss I've taken in one league so far is legitimately against the guy who's 4-0 in our league. Other than that, I'm 3-1, and I felt that I could take a risk because I am not in a position to lose badly in the next few weeks. Now, granted, a lot of these guys' teams change week to week because there's just so many trades happening all the time. However, as far as I see, I have a high chance of at least going for the next quarter 3-1, and I would say at worst 2-2, as long as Michael Thomas plays, because I traded DeAndre Hopkins for Michael Thomas and Traquan Smith. I tagged Traquan Smith as the collateral because at this point I have no idea, or should I say I got him as like the idea of him being a handcuff to Michael Thomas, because if Michael Thomas does not play this coming Sunday, which honestly I would not be surprised if he does not play, because there's a bye week for the Saints for week 6. And then the next week is against the Panthers, a division game, pretty important. If he doesn't play Sunday, he is against the Chargers. He's definitely going to play week 7. And if they really care about, winning the division, and they feel like they don't want to risk potentially hindering Michael Thomas's 100% recovery rate, and they feel confident enough with the team that they have already, they just would probably go ahead and rest him another week, give him 2 extra weeks of rest before they get into the grind, because by week 7 they're going to have to get the ball rolling regardless. So that's why I got Tre'Quan Smith, because Tre'Quan Smith has impressed basically for the rest for like this season since week 1, right? So he's gotten quite a bit of looks. So he had 5 receptions week 2 against LA. I said LA against Las Vegas. Let's get right. So he only got his first 2 touchdowns of the year came against Detroit, and that's really nice. He had 4 receptions, and they were big time receptions too. 54 yards is nothing to sneeze at. And then the week prior, he had 4 receptions for 42. He only had 8 points, but that's okay. And then, of course, like I said, in week 2, he had 5 receptions for 86 yards. So he's been serviceable. Let's also keep in mind, I have Emmanuel Sanders, who has shined in recent time comparative to his first 3 weeks in the season, to where, his first 2 weeks, where in week 3 and 4, he has acquired 15 fantasy points at least. And that's great. And he had a touchdown in week 3. So I think he will remain a bigger part in their offense. And it's unfortunate that it seems that I'm just stockpiling Saints players, but that is not the goal here. That is not what I'm trying to accomplish. What I just wanted was a guy who I know when he comes back, his volume will be the same. Michael Thomas's volume will remain the same. And that's just what I can see. And that's what I feel. I think as soon as Drew looked comfortable in Detroit, is going to get the ball rolling for the remainder of the time. There's just no way that him and Michael Thomas aren't going to be on the same page. I just have a hard time believing that, considering that he's still been in practice. He may not be playing, but he's still practicing. So I'd rather get the guy who was the best receiver in fantasy last year for a guy who is putting up really great stats volume-wise. But the Cardinals' offense is starting it cooled off from the first beginning of the first 2 weeks of the first quarter of the season. And I am worried because there's a lot of players on that offense that are kind of touching the ball besides the ones that people deemed important, like, Kenyon Drake. And it's already been said that Kenyon Drake needs to get the ball more. The offense might still be trying to find itself, and I think that at the end of the day, they might spread the ball and spread the wealth a bit more. And I don't think that DeAndre is going to continue to get the same amount of volume as he is right now. And that concerned me. Also, the ankle thing. The ankle thing didn't look too good as far as him continuing to play. I think he's a tough guy. He's going to continue to play. But also, I don't like when people sit on ankles. Or should I say play early on ankles and continue to play and just ride it out till it goes. Because ankles take a while to feel right. And even when you come back, they won't feel all 100% what you need to do. And a wide receiver needs to cut a lot. They have to be able to dig their feet, make quick turns in the turf or the field that they're playing in. The ankle thing concerned me. So I said, well, if the ankle thing is going to concern me, he had 11 points last week against a Panthers team whose defense honestly is not. They give up a lot of points to different players. Like, the 2 main guys that you would want to stop in DeAndre Hopkins who was limited to 7 receptions for 40 yards. And, of course, Kenyon Drake has been a crying shame thus far. And I really don't know why it is, because I don't believe he's a bad player. It's just he's been so severely underutilized, especially in the passing game, that it's getting ridiculous. Christian Kirk is getting all the touchdowns, and we're seeing a little bit of second-year issues from Kyler Murray. Like, when for the first 2 weeks, it looked darling, it looked great, but, you know, he is a second-year quarterback, and he had things that he had to work on in the first year and that are still kind of peeking its ugly heads out. So that's where I'm at. Michael Thomas is on my team, and we'll survive. All right, we're going to take our first break, and we'll come back talking more fantasy football here at the GSMC. Before we get back to fantasy football, I got to say, man, it's time to chill out. And the best way that I like to chill out is with Coors Light. It's made to chill. I love a cold, refreshing, mountain-chilled Coors Light. Whenever I'm watching a game, watching college basketball, you know, it's NBA playoffs, finals right now, and of course during Sundays in the NFL season. And it doesn't really matter what team or sport is playing. Coors Light is the official beer for watching any sport or team, just to drink beer. So flip through channels, find a sport, crack open a Coors Light. I enjoy it so much. It's so great. So Coors Light is the one I choose when I need to unwind, man. So when you want to hit reset, reach for the beer that is made to chill. Coors Light. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewers Company, Golden, Colorado.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, we're back, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast listeners, and now we're about to get back into the podcast, man. We're about to get ready. Let's bring on the winning attitude, winning culture here. GSMC, let's go. Someone who is winning, technically, but he may not be winning winning at your heart right now. Lamar Jackson. For one thing, he has a little bit of an injury. I don't know how severe it's going to be, but Lamar is a little bit hurt, and that is a little bit concerning, I'm sure, if you have him starting this week. But Lamar has a little bit of a fender bender, so he's expected to suit up against the Bengals on Sunday despite missing Thursday's practice with a stomach ache, but he also has a knee thing going on. So just to keep that in mind before we get going here. But Lamar, for all intents and purposes, right, he had 25 last week. 2 touchdown passes. He had also a rushing touchdown. That helps. But against Kansas City, 14 points. Against Houston, 17 points. And against Cleveland, he had 27 points. So overall, Lamar has been a little bit disappointing as far as what you expect. But once again, Lamar is getting the natural regression that we probably should have. That if you didn't expect, then I don't know what you expected, right? Lamar was only going to regress from what he did last year. It's the same thing with Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes 2 years ago was unbelievably fantasy gold. And then he regressed last year. Injuries and all that came with it. But the regression happened. The regression is happening right here before our very eyes. And unfortunately, that regression also impacts everybody else on the team because, at least fantasy-wise, right? Because J.K. Dobbins, Mark Ingram, Mark Andrews, these guys, Marquise Brown, they're not blowing up the fantasy stat sheets right now in the first quarter of the season. And if you drafted them expecting them to be what the Cowboys are, then you're having a bad time, because not everybody's getting the sugar, getting the wealth. If anything, if you drafted Lamar, at least you got yourself a high volume fantasy running back, essentially, right? A running back that can throw the ball. And I mean, he's a quarterback, but his statistics are closer to a running back one if you drafted him. And that's what a lot of people looked at him as in the first place. But he is not the same guy. He's basically, I'd say 65% of what he was last year so far. And that makes sense. The competition he's played has been a lot tougher in the first 4 weeks of this season than it was last season. Mark Ingram, he's just not getting a lot of the touches that he would have last year. Of course, bringing in someone like J.K. Dobbins, the question marks on what the running attack would look like was there. And now we're seeing a little bit of what might possibly be a regression in his production. And then Mark Andrews has kind of been touchdown or bust a little bit. Like last week, 3 of his catches, 2 of them were touchdowns. So if he doesn't score, he has another bad week. And that's not to say that, I'd rather have Mark Andrews than, Austin Hooper right now. But at least I know that Hooper is going to give me a solid 7. It's getting a little bit concerning when you own these Baltimore players. And I don't really know what else to say besides it all lives and dies with Lamar Jackson. And right now, Lamar Jackson, fantasy-wise, don't get me wrong, they're winning games. They look like a top 3 team in the NFL still, right? They are an amazing team. But for fantasy purposes, it's not looking great. So maybe it's time to look to trade Lamar to get a better package somewhere else. That is up for you all to decide, of course. These are your own teams. You get to choose what you want to do. However, if someone is offering you a package that you cannot refuse for Lamar Jackson, I suggest that you should figure it out and do it expeditiously. Speaking of expeditiously figuring out, we need to figure out this running back scarcity problem pronto, because as we see, if you have not grabbed one, you are if you weren't one of the lucky ones, right? Like, I consider myself a very lucky individual. I ended up getting Alvin Kamara. Luck. It's all luck that Alvin Kamara has panned out to be what he is right now. And even he, as a player, is probably due for some mid-season regression as Michael Thomas is going to come back. But Alvin Kamara has been a blessing to me. He's won me 2 games out of my 4, single-handedly, I would say. But if you ended up drafting Alvin Kamara, if you ended up drafting even, Aaron Jones, or you ended up drafting someone like, wow, I'm blanking on running back names right now. But essentially, if you didn't end up drafting Christian McCaffrey, you didn't end up drafting Saquon, but you still ended up getting a top 5 running back. Nick Chubb, it stinks, right? That hurts really bad. But for a while, if you had Nick Chubb, you're winning. If you ended up drafting Ezekiel Elliott, at a certain point, you would say at least he's not hurt for the entire season or missed like 6 games or going to, right? You're okay. You're above water. Running backs are very thin. If you have 3 on your roster, you're sitting pretty, personally, in my opinion. As long as they don't have the same bye week, you are doing well. You're doing something that you're doing great. Keep going. Right now, I would not be interested in trading away running backs unless you know for sure, if you feel like Mike Davis is going to have significant regression when Christian McCaffrey comes back, then sure, trade away Mike Davis. But if you need to get a decent haul to to either fill out your team, then I would say, yeah, go ahead, try and do that. But at the same time, right, I'm not even sure that we see Christian McCaffrey end up getting the same workload that he got before injury, because they may want to try and ease him back in. He may be on a pitch count. He may not be running in between the tackles. He may be only doing passing game work. Mike Davis, as far as I'm concerned, I think he will hold value for a decent part of this second quarter of the season. And I would be very cautious on his usage rate. Now, right now, his usage rate is through the roof. So if you are a guy who cares about having people at their highest peak of value and then letting them go and then moving on and doing that sort of thing, then of course it might be time to look elsewhere and move them off somewhere. But if you just need a serviceable back that might be able to give you 10, 11 points a game, if that's your running back 2 or whatever, then that might be, you might just need to hold on them and just sit, because running backs just aren't available. They're just not. Running backs are so scarce. If I look through just waivers where running backs are, the top running back waiver wise for us right now in my league, Keyshawn Vaughn, right? We have some Alexander Madison, who I ended up drafting, right? I drafted him and I dropped him because I didn't know the situation with Dalvin Cook's contract, what that was going to look like. And then Dalvin Cook, of course, got paid. So that was all well and good. But you've seen a lot of like Jordan Wilkins out there. You're getting Trenton Cannon. It's not looking well. It's not good. I mean, tried and true. Giovanni Bernard is down there, but I just don't think Giovanni Bernard is going to give you anything worth anything, unfortunately. Especially if he's not catching the ball, which he didn't get one reception in their win, and they're going up against Baltimore. So maybe he gets more passing work. So if you really need a running back, he might be one, just because if you think Cincinnati is going to hang in there with Baltimore and being able to run the ball, I just don't think that's going to happen. But, you can only do so much in these waiver wires before things just start to look very scarce. So you may have to spend some trading and getting some guys out there, because right now the waivers are drying up. The waiver well, if you will, is drying up. It is not looking quality. It is not looking quality. So I'm not too particularly happy about it personally. It scares the bejeebus out of me that running back scarcity is this high. Maybe things will change once players start coming back and people will be able to be a little bit more lenient in their trade talks. But right now, you might have to give up a pretty piece for Josh Kelly. That's insane. People with Austin Ekeler who didn't have Josh Kelly are in a lot of emotional distress. I would be. I just saw somebody trade Josh Kelly for Melvin Gordon. I'm sorry, that's a lie. I saw somebody trade Austin Ekeler for Melvin Gordon just because he's already 1-3 and he can't afford more losses. If he won, like if he was my position, we're 3-1, you just got to sit on it. You just got to sit on it and ride through and just know that whoever is replacing him is only going to give you about at bare maximum 11 points. That's what you're hoping for. In reality, you're getting like 6. You're going to have to ride that 6 points per game until Austin Ekeler can return. That's just what it is, unfortunately. I wouldn't, but for the reals, when you're down bad, you're going to make some down bad decisions. It's just like when somebody's down bad. When you know a guy is down bad is when he starts selling stuff that has no value just to make a little bit of change. Like when people are starting to go to GameStop and sell their game systems, right? That's when things are getting tough, because GameStop is taking your thing hand over fist. For like $50, you paid $300 or $400 for it 2 years ago, you're done. They're saying you can take this $75 and go on with about your day, or you can keep your system. Which one? And you just be surprised as how many people look at that guy who's he's selling it to in the eyes, look at the PlayStation, close his eyes, and just hand it over. Because you're just that down bad. People are down bad in running back situations. I am. I feel down bad. All it takes is just one. My running back core is thin. I have 3 running backs on roster right now. 2 of them play on the same team. I still have Cam Akers, who I drafted, and I have Darrell Henderson Jr. or Darrell Henderson Jr. Either one of those guys just kicks the bucket, I am in panic mode. I have to start shopping people on my team that I don't want just to survive. I'm gasping for air. So I'm in search to fill the running back void right now, and it's not good. Trying to get people to come off running backs right now is just not possible. It's actually almost impossible. People don't want to trade running backs. Everybody's asking for one in the league. You're not getting it. It's tough. Honestly, I don't know what to do about it. I'm just going to have to wait it week by week, bide my time, and, do my deeds in the darkness, so to speak. I try to get my trades done in privacy, because it's going to show up in the group chat. It's going to show up in the text thread. Someone's going to put the image in there, and somebody's not going to like your trade, and they're going to start talking trash. That's the number one thing. Have confidence in what your decision making was in the trade, because if you can't justify the trade, then no one can justify the trade, and thus you got fleeced. And if you regurgitate what someone else told you in via trade and why it was good for you to make the trade, you got fleeced too. Don't get fleeced. Make strong decisions. Make right-minded decisions that you have your heart and your paper on. Right? You're trying to win some paper here. Some money, some moolah, some bragging rights. You got to put it all in. You got to be able to be all in at all times, and you don't want to be caught slipping, because they will start sliding on you, and you don't want people to slide on you via trades, because they'll start smelling the chum in the water. Right now, if you're 1-3, if you're 0-4, you are the chum right now, and people are swimming around. The sharks are on their way. So you got to start making some moves to get some dubs, because if you're not winning, you are in big time trouble for people to just start berating you with bad trades. That's what people are planning to do to you. They might already starting right now. It might be small little blips here in the radar saying like, hey, I see you're 0-4. How about some Julio Jones talks? I see he's on your roster. Please. But let's take another break, and we'll come back talking more fantasy. We're going to talk about some Titans coming up.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, we're back. GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast here. We are still taping. It is a Thursday, so the game is not played yet. We'll talk about that later on. Let's move on to the Titans situation, right? So Titans, COVID struck them pretty harsh last week, and now reports have been said that they were not following proper instructions throughout the entire season. And it is not looking good. So as the NFL continues with positive COVID tests across different teams, 2-week 5-game set for Sunday has been, or 2-week 5 games set for Sunday have been postponed. So the Tennessee Titans and the Buffalo game has been moved to Tuesday, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter. And while New England and Denver Broncos game is being moved to early in the week, as well as it'll be moved to Monday night Broncos reporter Mike Kills reported that both the Titans and the Patriots have been postponed in Week 4. So Adam Schefter saying that Bills and Chiefs game being switched from next Thursday to Sunday, but goes back. It will go back if more positive tests in Tennessee per source. And Mike Key says that the Broncos have been informed that their game against New England has been moved to Sunday to Monday per source, and it will be early Monday night game. So for the Titans and Bills games, there are still no guarantee that the game is played on its new date due to an outbreak with the Titans organization. What began with a few positive tests on September 24th has transformed into over 20 members of the organization testing positive for COVID-19. Their Week 4 contest with the Pittsburgh Steelers was postponed until later in the season, forcing schedule changes that impact the Baltimore Ravens as well. Reports have recently surfaced showing that the Titans holding team workouts and high school fields, or holding team workouts at high school fields, even after the organization was advised to stay away from the facility and not hold group gatherings. With positive tests still coming in, it has some believing that forfeits should be on the table. The Bills were scheduled to play the Kansas City Chiefs on Thursday night in Week 6, but the game is now being moved to Sunday. Schefter reported that unless Bills' Week 5 game against the Titans is postponed, in which case their matchup with the Chiefs will remain on Thursday. The Patriots and Broncos matchup is delayed due to New England's cornerback Stephon Gilmore testing positive for COVID-19. The Patriots had their Week 4 game against the Chiefs moved to Sunday to Monday after Cam Newton tested positive for the virus. All other tests have come back negative, and so Gilmore played on Monday, and it seems as if the NFL is now reaching a breaking point in the 2020 season after 3 relatively smooth weeks of play to open up the campaign. The last week plus has been filled with numerous problems. More positives and potential outbreaks will continue to push back other games and create scheduling nightmares. So far the league has found a way to work around it, but it may not last forever. This was from Yahoo Sports, written by Ryan Homer. So great information there. So what do we do if we have Titans players? I have Corey Davis on a roster. What do I do? Honestly, I don't know, because there's so many things that could go bad for this. If you have Derrick Henry, which, to be honest, I'll be honest with you, I've been trying to buy Derrick Henry for a reasonable price. I've been trying to get Derrick Henry off of one of the guys that owns him in my league, and he refuses to sell. And I understand, pride hurts. But keep in mind, just because, say they do forfeit some games, we still have really no idea when the Titans will be able to play football in the relative future, because it doesn't seem like the situation is getting any better. Like, this sucks. If you have Titans players, this is horrendous. This is horrendous. This is bad. I don't think I'll be able to get off Corey Davis. This is not good. And I don't even want to get off Corey Davis per se. He was having one of the best the best start of his career thus far in fantasy wise. And I was enjoying having him on my team. So much so that last week I thought, you know what, they'll figure it out. This thing will be nixed later on and we'll be all good. So maybe somebody will panic trade Derrick Henry. So I've been trying to get him for a while. For at least a week now, I've been, fielding offers and seeing how it works out. But Derrick Henry is just not leaving that dude's team, and more power to him. I just hope he realizes in 2 weeks, I probably will not be asking for Derrick Henry, because sometimes you just have to move on from guys and respect their decision to say no to your trades. That's the biggest thing. Respect the decision when people say no, because if you don't, then you're just being a bad guy. And we try to promote good trade activity here at the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. So don't be a bad guy. If he says no in the trade, move on. Find someone else if you really need it that bad. But Titan situation looks pretty rough. I don't really know what to tell you, because it could be so specific with what your team makeup is and what you have. But hopefully you don't have a lot of Titans players to try and replace. And the bigger ones, is the fact that I guess the big three would be Derrick Henry, I guess Ryan Tannehill to a lesser extent, and A.J. Brown, who even I put him ahead of Tannehill. But that is it's not good for anybody owning those guys. You could probably replace Tannehill with a decent level production. You're not going to replace Derrick Henry. And, you know, the whole ideology that Derrick Henry only gets stronger as the season goes along is nice and good, but he's going to be really fresh. So maybe that theory doesn't work out. As far as suspensions go, now, honestly, if the league really wanted to show how serious they were about COVID-19, there would be some hefty suspensions coming from Mike Vrabel and the gang. Tennessee head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, whoever is the coaching staff. I'm sure it would just really go to the GM or the head coach. Probably the head coach over the GM, right? But there's just no way that the entire organization did not know they were still practicing. So a lot of people are going to have to take the axe for this. I don't know who is, but someone's going to have to take a mighty chop from the big axe of the NFL for this. And it's not going to be a player, right? They're already basically being suspended, technically, because nobody can play. But the fact that other teams have to sit here and deal with punishment via proxy and not play their games and have to push them back or lose their bye weeks because of this, it's horrendous. At the bare minimum, they need to forfeit a game to the Steelers, because it doesn't seem like this is going to work. The Titans can't keep this up, right? This can't keep, like, if they keep getting positive tests, this is going to be horrific. And I haven't seen any news on if they've contact traced this down. And the fact that they went out and practiced last week, even though warned and told to stay away from doing so, is a complete disregard to the league's total agenda this year, disregard to the fans, disregard to other teams. You've put safety in jeopardy for everybody else in the league. You are jeopardizing the league. This is complete, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is like a 9. This is honestly the 9, almost close to the 10. Like, when people were furious with Lou Williams for going to a strip club to supposedly get chicken wings, where he does have chicken wings named after him and such, right? That's the thing. People were saying that he should be suspended from playoffs. He should be suspended for X amount of games. This requires immediate discipline. Some disciplinary action needs to happen. Like, let's look at this from a pandemic side for just a second. I know this isn't going to be the most fun thing, because we kind of disregarded the pandemic for a little while on this podcast, just because football was back. It was fun. It was quirky. We were getting back in the groove. We felt like it never left us, and it technically didn't. But now it's starting to have some showings. What we all feared was that if we can't control an outbreak, what are we going to do? We're not in some NBA bubble situation, right? We can't get constant tests on the day's notice in one consecutive place. You can't put 32 NFL teams in one place, right? That's impossible, because of just the sheer size and will. Some people talk about, like, I've talked to friends about this. They say, well, put them in, like, different cities, like, you know, the cities they're in. So let's say Atlanta, because I live here. You know, put them at the Marriott for a little bit. Just let them stay there for a long time. And I said, the NFL Players Association would never agree to do such a thing. They want to go home. They will always want to go home in this sort of situation. And we can't compare one of the biggest, you know, amusement attractions in the United States in Disney World to a Marriott hotel. And you have to stay there the whole time. Like, I understand they make millions of dollars. Like, a lot of these guys make millions. A lot of these guys make a lot of money that we will never see in our lifetime. But we also have to understand that even us, People who do not make millions barely want to be in hotels that we pay a lot of money for like a week in a vacation, let alone an athlete who can afford better, houses look better, and have to stay there, go to practice, go to workouts, go to team meetings, then just go straight to their living room, to their hotel room every day and do nothing else. They can't go anywhere. No, it's not happening. It's absolutely not happening. It just can't happen. There's nothing to do. You're going to keep going to the pool twice, and then you're done. You're ready to move out. Keep in mind, these guys travel all the time. They've seen all the hotels. They know what hotels are about. It won't happen. And it wasn't going to happen. That would never have been agreed upon, and the players just wouldn't have come back. I feel like they would have come back, but they wouldn't have settled on that. It would have had to change from that point of view, and it still will never happen. There was probably more success in the idea of thinking that there'd be like a football island, like there was Fight Island. If Jerry Jones and a gang of super rich investors just started making football fields on like some remote island somewhere, and just really just went like high school football stadium like construction plan, whip it up, get it going, and just play NFL right there. I would have believed that would be something that the NFLPA would have agreed upon before they agree to put people in, regional bubbles, but their bubbles are just basically hotel rooms, and they never are going to agree with that. I wouldn't agree to it, and I'm not a player. I don't want to sit in a hotel room. I'm not doing that. Absolutely not. When people go on vacation, right? When you can do stuff, of course. When you go on vacation, even in quarantine, in mid-pandemic, people have gone on vacation. They've had to book hotels. They've had to book Airbnbs. They're not staying inside. Why would you do that? If you paid all the money to do, it's crazy to think we pay all this money, right? This isn't about money, like hotel price rent. I'm not trying to do that. What I'm saying is, we as normal society, we pay so much money to rent a hotel room because that's what they charge. But we don't even stay in there except to sleep. That's it, really. We only stay in there except to sleep. Either we're taking midday naps, or we're taking the long nap, which is going to sleep at night, and then we leave. The only bright side about hotels is that you don't necessarily have to make the bed. Some people do it to be nice. Shout out Russell Westbrook, $8,000 tip, and he made the bed, left it spotless in the bubble. Shout out to him. But, you don't have to make the bed as long as, they have a cleaning crew. And if you get the continental breakfast or get the breakfast provided, you're living pretty. That's the best part of a hotel experience, is a continental breakfast for me. So if you remember anything about today's podcast, or me in general, Ethan loves a continental breakfast. It's been stated. It's here. It's written in code. Right there. So, in fact, shout us out, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast on Twitter. Let me know if you like continental breakfasts right there. We're going to take our final break and come back for our last segment of the podcast where we talk about some games right here, right now. GSMC will be right back.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We're going through some games, man. But first, we got to talk about players to target. But we're about to end the podcast off on some games, too. We got to talk about that. But Fantasy Pros put out a nice little list. They've done it for a couple weeks, and now I feel like it's been a good chunk of time. So it's titled Let's Make a Deal by Dan Harris. 10 players to target in trades by week 5. So injuries continue to take their toll for week 4, and as a result was a significant increase in trading activity. And the chart that they provide shows a number of trades completed in leagues of managers that have incorporated their teams into the My Playbook from Monday through Thursday night of this week. So, number 1 ranked guy over the past week in trades is Kenyon Drake. Number 2 is David Montgomery. Number 3, Josh Kelly. Number 4, Todd Gurley. Number 5, Antonio Gibson. Number 6, Melvin Gordon. Number 7, Mike Davis. Number 8, Myles Gaskin. Number 9, Julio Jones. Number 10, David Johnson. So last week, the top 10 most traded players were dealt a total of 14,824 times. This week, there were 18,600 trades involving the top 10 most traded players, with injuries to Nick Chubb and Austin Ekeler fantasy managers. Running back depth has been tested. So it's no surprise that 9 of the top 10 most traded players were running backs. And we're going to examine some situations of each of the most actively dealt players and using the trade value chart. It will be seen as if we can find some deals that fantasy managers may want to propose. So Kenyon Drake has been one of the biggest disappointments in fantasy, particularly after last week when he gained just 35 yards and what would have been a smash spot against the Panthers. Drake has seen a ridiculously low 5 targets on the season, and Chase Edmonds has found the end zone more often. It's possible that Drake is bothered by his vague preseason injury that had him in a walking boot, though there's been no indication that the ailment is hampering him. Whatever it is, Drake's production this season raises red flags, such as even buying low is a risky proposition. With that said, you should buy low on Kenyon Drake. Drake is still the 19th ranked running back of the season for most people, enough to make him worth roughly a Juju Smith-Schuster type of receiver. And you'd argue that you would continue to be willing to be part of that type of asset if you needed a running back, though. And Drake can be had for lower. You start with your offers. But be warned, this is not a Joe Mixon hurry and go run out and buy low situation that happened last week. Whether it's Drake's health or offensive philosophy, something it seems off with the running game in Arizona. And although Drake presents a low buy opportunity, the operative word is low, and the only pay full price you are in is in the real need of a running back with upside. And there are some repeat offenders from last week's article. So last week, the writer wrote that Montgomery is always going to be one of the most traded players this season, and that's just how it's going to be. And unsurprisingly, he checks in the second most traded player spot this week. Todd Gurley was 4th most traded player this week and was the 3rd most last week. Kenyon Drake, Mike Davis, Myles Gaskin, and David Johnson all appear on the most traded list for the 2nd week in a row as well. And for the most part, the same reasons offered last week as to why these backs were being traded apply today. Montgomery, Gurley, Gaskin, and Johnson are all the type of low ceiling guaranteed touch running backs who can be highly valuable depending on the fantasy manager, with buys starting injuries to several prominent players at the position and COVID-19 concerns forcing potential postponements, cancellations. Running backs with guaranteed floor can be incredibly valuable, as Kyle Yates would aptly put this week. So Kyle Yates tweeted out, "Me in August, no, I don't want Le'Veon Bell on my fantasy football roster. Me now, will somebody please trade me Le'Veon Bell so I can have a starting running back?" They are not entirely in the same tier, of course, Gurley, Johnson, Montgomery, Gaskin, in this order in which they should be valued in the opinion, but all offer a warm body. If you sell high on Gurley after his 2 touchdown games, such as for Amari Cooper, then do so. But Gurley does have a light schedule coming up, and with Julio Jones' injury, the Falcons could lean in on the running game a bit more. Don't give him away. Montgomery is what he is at this point. Although fantasy managers can expect him to maintain the increased work in the passing game we saw last week, this is not a savior for your team. Montgomery's value is lower than Gurley's, and this has been written prior to the Thursday night game, of course, but swapping him for a Kenny Golladay or DJ Shark type player would make sense if you need a wide receiver. As for David Johnson, fantasy managers should try and wait until at least this weekend, when his value will hopefully be higher after the Texans take on the Jaguars. Johnson has been less than impressive in most difficult matchups, and with Duke Johnson back, fantasy managers are almost certainly not willing to pay full price. If you're rostering Johnson, hold him for now unless you can get a similar return as you would for Montgomery. As for Gaskin, it depends on the particular situation. If you do need some guaranteed touches, then Gaskin fits the bill. If he hasn't had fewer than 13 touches or 66 total yards in any game this season, although he lacks touchdown upside, that sort of stability is useful for fantasy managers still. Gaskin is merely on par with John Brown type of receiver, and it should be in that range of any deal. And as far as from Mike Davis, he said this last week, the writer, he is a running back 2 so long as he starts at running back for the Panthers, and will be a minimum of 2 more weeks and possibly longer. But there's still little to no chance that he has much value in the second half of the season. So other than a week later, nothing has really changed. Davis will be an excellent play this week against Atlanta, but is unlikely to have significant value over the second half of the season. If you can survive this week, you are in good shape, considering making an offer for Austin Ekeler or Nick Chubb and fortify your team for the long haul. Joshua Kelly. So Joshua Kelly inclusion on the list of the most traded players surely has to do with Austin Ekeler's injury, which should keep him out of action to 4 to 6 weeks. Kelly is presumably taking a heavier load of the platoon work in the backfield, with Justin Jackson garnering more of a role going forward as well. Kelly's value is difficult to assess. He's a rookie who has fumbles in back-to-back games, and he faces the Saints and Jets in the next 2 weeks. There's certainly a plausible path for Kelly's value to stay right where it was prior to Ekeler's injury. But the Chargers likely aren't going anywhere this season, and Anthony Lynn has turned over the starter's role to Justin Herbert. They'll want to see what they have in Joshua Kelly. So although the youngster will still surely split time with Justin Jackson, it's probable that he'll see upwards to 15 touches per game and produce like a borderline running back too. If you're rostered Kelly and are strong at running back, considering trading him for someone like Deontay Johnson, DJ Moore, or Tyler Boyd, and yes, there's a chance that he could be worth significantly more than that if everything breaks right, but so too is the chance that he'll be worth significantly less. Bank the production now if you have to trade him or for a liable asset. Antonio Gibson and Melvin Gordon. So Gordon and Gibson together will be addressed because fantasy managers should value them similarly in trade discussions. Both are coming off games that resulted in a gain in trade value. Gordon touched the ball 25 times for 118 yards and 2 scores against the Jets, while Gibson totaled 128 yards and a touchdown against the Ravens. Gordon will have to deal with Philip Lindsay's return, likely beginning with this weekend against the Patriots, and Gibson will see a quarterback change. Both could be reliable running back 2s, with Gordon a bit more valuable in the standard formats and both equally valuable in PPR. In this year's environment, this equates to a low-end wide receiver 1 value, so don't trade either back unless you're getting a Allen Robinson, a DK Metcalf, or a Tyler Lockett type of player. And finally, Julio Jones. So there's been a lot of questions about Julio's trade value, and more than any other player this week. And here's his take on this, right? His take, not his tank, but his take. Unless you buy incredibly low, don't bother trading for or away Julio Jones. Just don't. We don't know how much time he'll miss with the hamstring injury, if any, so you're necessarily evaluating a trade without any data. With that said, some managers just love to deal. So if you're valuing Jones as for the moment that he's in right now, it would be as a lower end wide receiver 2. You would peg him in the same value as DJ Shark and Kenny Golladay, and just below Robert Woods and Terry McLaurin. If you roster Jones and you desperately need a replacement, there's an area in which you'll be looking. If you're targeting Jones, be prepared to the possibility that he'll miss significant time either now or after potential aggravation to his injury. And if you have the depth, go ahead and make a move. But really, he would prefer to not include Jones in any deal at this point. So those are your Let's Make a Deal 10 players that you can find real quick. And real quick before we finish out the podcast, let's go ahead and look at Week 5 NFL games and see what we have here, right? So right now, it's the Patriots. Tampa Bay is playing the Chicago Bears. They are up 10-0, and Chicago has the ball as 4th and 6 on the Tampa Bay 46. So that should tell you how that's going. So if you ended up trying to bet the under, like I took a bet that the Chicago Bears would be within 6 points, so I took the +6 on the Chicago Bears. It's not looking great right now, but we need some. Let's put our prayer hands up. Maybe Trubisky comes in the game. Who knows, right? We might not know. Maybe Matt Nagy might be the surprise coach firing that we just didn't expect to see, because this is the second time he's benched Trubisky, and since Trubisky has been benched, technically he did win a game with Nick Foles, but Nick Foles does not look good. He lost last week, and this is not looking great. You know, it's the early second quarter, and they are down 10-0, and they're about to give the ball back to the Buccaneers. We have Jaguars-Texans. That's going to be an interesting game just because of the storylines. Texans fire their head coach. We'll see what happens on all spectrums according to their offense, see what changes. I'm still a fan of Jordan Atkins, but I think he's still dealing with a nagging injury. We'll see what happens. Bengals versus Ravens. The Bengals game is going to be fun to watch on Sunday for me, just because I like to see just what exactly that Ravens rushing attack is going to look like, because the Bengals don't have a very good rushing defense, although their passing defenses look pretty solid this far this year. And I like to see what Joe Burrow has to do against a defense this strong, although this might not be the best Joe Mixon game, because they go down a few scores. They will have to throw the ball and get active in the passing game. Falcons-Panthers, this is going to be hopefully a redemption story for all you goose egg Calvin Ridley owners. And hopefully, if you own DJ Moore, something will change, right? Robbie Anderson show right now, Mike Davis show right now. Teddy looks great, but I have the Panthers winning this game, and if they control it by controlling the ball and keeping it away from Matt Ryan and that explosive potential offense of the Falcons, then I see a lot of Robbie Anderson in the slot, or not in the slot, but doing slant routes and in between routes. And unfortunately, that might mean DJ Moore will continue to be limited for the foreseeable future. The Chiefs are at home against the Raiders, and the Raiders, the Chiefs right now are a team that's kind of clicking at the right time in this part of the season, right? They're not fully there yet, but they have offensively looked really strong, even though I would say that Clyde Edwards-Helaire in non-PPR leagues has been a little bit disappointing since the first game, but he is a rookie, and they might still be trying to work him in. Josh Jacobs is a guy who needs to have a bigger game, but against the Chiefs, if you go down a few scores, he might get schemed out, so be prepared for that. And if you have Darren Waller, this might be a big game for him. Cardinals at the Jets. Yeah, I don't have much else to say. It's the Cardinals at the Jets. I say the biggest game of the week. There's not too many of them, obviously, but I think that, looking forward towards a Week 5 Saints appearance against the Chargers, which is a Monday night game, might be the best game of the week. And I'm not trying to be biased, but that just seems what it is. But without a doubt, that's the podcast for this week, man. Hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. Please rate, review, subscribe. Tell me how I did. If you liked it, tell me how I did if you didn't. Everything helps. Don't forget to follow us on social media, Facebook and Twitter at GSMC Fantasy Football. Ask us some stuff. We'll answer back in a timely fashion. Shout out to all the rest of the crew. I'll talk to you guys on Tuesday. Peace out and happy fantasy.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.